you. It's certainly my pleasure to join you here this morning to talk about my experience with the Diversity and Community Engagement Plan development with the town of Ajax. And first I'll start off by giving you a little bit of context and history. And Audrey introduced me, so I was brought to the table. Funnily enough, I didn't work with the town of Ajax when the plan was in development. So if we go back to 2009, 2010, the town of Ajax began a journey to really explore how they were meeting the needs of their diverse residents. And all of us in this room know our community is continuing to evolve and change, and with that becomes a lot of opportunities to do things differently and to do things better. And we wanted in the town of Ajax to really be ahead of that change, to anticipate that change, and to plan for how the needs of residents were embedded into the policy and program frameworks at the town of Ajax. So to that end, the town of Ajax commissioned the development of a diversity and community engagement plan to listen to subject matter experts, residents, local organizations, and from that input make meaningful recommendations with respect to the town's strong desire to attract and retain a diverse staff team that is responsive to the needs of the community, to work more effectively with community partners to better engage residents and strengthen neighborhoods so that residents and businesses feel connected and feel a sense of ownership over the success of Ajax, and to be able to create meaningful pathways to provide input to programs and services, and to again ensure that staff consider the needs of all residents in our planning process. So to that end, a committee of staff and members of council and community representatives gathered to talk about what that process would look like. And to Martin's point, not going out to the community with a plan as a checkbox process, but really collecting through focus groups, key interviews, surveys, community discussions, sort of those goals, dreams, thoughts about what our community could look like and what the role of the town could be in that larger process. So certainly embarked on a very consultative process. I had the pleasure to co-chair that process. At the time, I was the executive director of the Community Development Council, and certainly took it, as many of my fellow steering committee members did, to really collectively hold the feet to the fire, so to speak, to ensure that the needs of residents really were embedded in the plan and that we removed barriers to consultation. So we talked about how, where, when, why, and how that would really play out in a meaningful way. So the committee itself was comprised of a diverse cross-section of community members and organizational representatives that really reflected the broadest reflection of our community. So we really, again, to sort of quote a common term we used at the LDIPSI, a big D diversity perspective. So considering all the intersectionality of diversity. So whether that's from an abilities perspective, age, immigration status, from a gender identity perspective, how do we ensure that all of those perspectives, all of those goals are really captured in the plan? So the committee itself, we went broad out to the community to really recruit actively members who could bring to that table the networks, as Martin alluded to earlier, and the perspectives and reflections of those diverse communities. Integral to the plan was the gathering of input from key opinion leaders, focus groups, and surveys. And those were all key elements in designing the plan. And as I said, it was really critical to continue to consult. I think we used to say consult, consult, consult. So we kept going back out to the community through the process, checking in, ensuring that we were on track, that we were reflecting what we heard accurately. And we know that for the plan to ensure sustainable change, it would need to identify where the town of Ajax had to take an active role and be a leader in adjusting systems, policies, and practices to create those necessary pathways that are needed for full and meaningful inclusion. So in June 2010, Council approved the plan with a multi-year horizon, a 5-year horizon. We are now in the 3rd year of implementing that plan. And I'm really pleased to share that we are at the point where we have either completed or well underway with 40 of the 51 deliverables contained within the plan. I do want to make a comment that I have two of my fellow staff committee members here with me, Donna Bright, who is the chair of our staff committee, and David Forget, who are sitting over here. And we also have our chair of our resident advisory committee to the DACE process as well, Lee Harrison, in the back part of the room. So they will hold me accountable, ensure that everything that I say is absolutely reflective of our process. It's good to have accountability. So again, is sort of background. The town has really thought of themselves as an advocate in the area of diversity and inclusion for many years. And what is now the DACE Committee was originally incorporated as the Race Relations Committee back in 1997. So there's a fair bit of history into the creation of the DACE Committee and the DACE Plan. And we heard from our community through the process that they really felt that the town was doing a lot of things well, but as always, there's always room for improvement. And one of the things we talked about at the steering committee is giving ourselves permission and forgiving and allowing ourselves forgiveness that we don't have everything absolutely right all of the time. And I think that's really critical to be able to do the kind of self-analysis that you need to ensure that you continue to move the agenda forward. The plan itself is divided into 5 key deliverable areas, as you can see noted here. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus mainly on the policy development and review and town as employer, although disclaimer, in a 10-minute time period, not focusing very much on much, just sort of giving a very high-level skim, so apologies to my colleagues in the room. When we look at the policy review area, what we heard was that we needed a comprehensive policy review that included the review of the race relations policy and a replacement with a new, more innovative and reflective diversity policy. And we needed to develop clear mechanisms for oversight to ensure that we were holding each other accountable to the diversity policy, and we embedded the meaning and the intent of the diversity policy broadly at all levels of the organization across all policies. Quite a large undertaking. We also, under Town as Employer, heard that we needed to develop education and training programs to ensure that employees were aware of their rights and responsibilities in creating welcoming and inclusive workplaces, but also how do they serve our community better in a more inclusive and welcoming way. So that was integral to the plan. And with that, obviously, you need to create the tools, the mechanisms, and the pathways to give staff and residents the ability to hold each other accountable. Under our access to programs and services, we needed to look at a full comprehensive program and services review to ensure that we were meeting the intent of the diversity policy. We also needed to focus on how we were engaging with residents and make sure that we were taking every opportunity to engage in new and innovative ways and broadening our networks, casting our nets wider, so to speak, and hearing from those we hadn't heard from before and ensuring that their perspectives were equally represented. And fifth, we wanted to look at the development of neighborhood capacity, strengthening in our neighborhoods, looking at how do we build neighborhood connectiveness, how do we ensure that residents feel safe and included, not only at the town of Ajax, but within their neighborhoods as well. So certainly an ambitious plan. When we look at our best key recommendations around policy. When we did our best practices review, we had the opportunity through the entire process to draft a diversity policy that was, of course, throughout the process presented to community for their feedback and ability to comment. They designed, and all through the process, there really was a plan and a set of tools and indicators developed in Ajax for Ajax residents. And I think that's also critical to your success. Once we had this overarching document, then we began, as I said, that comprehensive policy review. And municipalities certainly have a few policies at their disposal. So not something that can be done quickly, but something that certainly is integral to success. One of the comments I have here is Ajax is an ISO organization. And what I really appreciated was the intersection of the ISO quality system and how that itself, if you embed diversity and inclusion within the policy review how ISO can actually help you to advance diversity and inclusion initiatives from a policy perspective. And I think that was a great learning, and perhaps one that we hadn't necessarily thought ISO was a tool for diversity and inclusion, but there you go. It certainly was a strong driver. We also incorporated a diversity and inclusion lens that all staff need to use when they're reviewing policies and when they're reviewing programs and services. So the training and rollout of a diversity lens was integral to our success as well. So what you see in front of us is the diversity statement. So again, this was developed through that robust consultative process. And when we rolled out the diversity statement, once it was incorporated, the discussion and the education forums with staff really talked about why and how staff can live this every day with colleagues and residents, and that's really integral. The diversity statement itself, it was hung in more than 35 town locations, and we display diversity and inclusion banners as well at all of our festivals and events. We reviewed and amended our proclamation and flag raising policies to ensure that they were reflective of community needs. And we also reviewed our sports field allocation and room allocation process. This again is really important so that residents can see themselves reflected in town spaces. And under old policies, for anybody in the recreation field, sometimes those groups that are more established have more access to assets within the community framework. So we really looked at how do we review that allocation policy with a diversity and inclusion lens. We also looked at our affordable access policy and put more money into our affordable access program so that we could work with residents who came from differing levels of socioeconomic status, and they could feel fully included in programs and services at the town of Ajax. So when we look at our diversity lens, and I want to pay homage to City of Toronto because we did borrow. That's another big learning. Feel free to borrow as long as you recognize those you borrow from. I think we need no recreating the wheel is needed. But in the era of jargons and acronyms, we're often asked what on earth is a diversity lens and how does staff use that? It sounds really overwhelming. It sounds intimidating, and really it's quite simple. And what we talked about, it's really three basic questions that we encourage staff to ask on a regular basis. So one, how do we know? How do we know what the barriers are? What did we do to find out what those barriers are? And how can we speak to that in a measurable way? Two, what did we do when we learned about the barriers? What were the changes that we made? And how do we know that it worked? So again, how do we hold ourselves accountable? Sometimes we may make decisions based on our best knowledge, and it actually doesn't work, and that's okay. I think we need to give ourselves permission to make mistakes as long as we're continuing to push the agenda forward. Where we look as town as an employer, we have several key areas here. So we looked at our staff committees and our committees that report to council as well. Were they really reflecting the needs, the issues, and sort of the pulse of our community? Also, we looked at our staff performance management evaluations, and I am pleased to share with you that every staff member at the town of Ajax, through their performance management system, is evaluated on diversity competence. That is a core competency at the town of Ajax that you need to possess. So when we do annual performance reviews, that is something that we talk about with employees, and it's measurable, and it's something that we are able to report on as an organization. Again, very critical to embed that into performance management. Applicant tracking. We will be incorporating an applicant tracking system as well. You need to as well measure success. And while some of our indicators of success are less easy to qualify, some are very easy to qualify and are more numeric. So how do we track an applicant from the very beginning of their journey through the process, and what can we learn from that where it comes to reflections of diversity, and where are we casting our nets, and where are we finding success with diverse communities? And this tool will help us to do this. We've also done confidential in-house surveys of our staff, and again, it's about diversity competence. Not only who you represent within the big D intersectionality of diversity, that is one measure, but it's also about what is your competency around all issues of diversity, so that you're not just competent on one or two perhaps easier or more comfortable areas of diversity for you that we really need to, again, look at Big D diversity. We have our staff DACE Advisory Committee, Diversity and Community Engagement, as well as our Resident Advisory Committee that reports to Council. And certainly staff are tasked with visiting this committee on a regular basis with any programs and services, questions, and they put it to that committee for their reflection, advice, and is reported to Council. So they also hold us accountable. So thank you to Lee and his crew for keeping us on our toes. And as well, incorporating mentorship and internship programs within our HR program as well. Really key to give people great opportunities, and certainly through the school boards, through their ELT programs and things of that nature. You can find some amazing individuals looking for Canadian experience, for example, and what a great opportunity for us as employers to give that back. So when we talk about accomplishments, I think we're really proud of a lot of what we've done. Again, I think if we focus on our intersection between ISO and our diversity policies, great unexpected win. In terms of our full comprehensive policy review, really a huge undertaking, and pleased to report on that. We've also cast our net more widely in our recruitment practices, certainly using local tools such as welcome centers and the immigration portal, but also ethnic media to be able to, through our HR process, to be able to ensure that people know about opportunities. We've incorporated a language translation line so that those whose mother tongue is not English or French can access the 10 most predominant languages other than English and French through the language line, and certainly they can access French as well. Our last appointment of committees, 90 residents were appointed to our 7 council advisory committees. Pleased to report that nearly 80% of those appointed were new. So we had, again, not the usual suspects sitting on our resident advisory committees. And this is also important. So people get familiar with the town and they perhaps aren't as critical, and they need to be able to call us if they on things if they think we're not doing what we said we were going to do. So having 80% of new folks certainly helps to make that happen. And as well, I think, it's good to borrow, again, if you attribute, you need to consult, you need to cast your nets wide. And I think, my last parting thought is just remember it's a journey, it's not a destination. And we're always going to be striving for better, for more inclusive practices, and we're never going to arrive there, and that's okay, because then we become complacent. So with that, I'll leave it and turn it over to my colleague Bruce.